Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the latest major political, human rights, and security developments over in Pakistan. We're pulling our insights directly from a really comprehensive query response compiled by the European Union Agency for Asylum. We have a ton of ground to cover, unpacking everything from political crackdowns to complex cultural dynamics, so we can map out exactly what is happening on the ground right now.
So, to kick things off, we really have to ask a critical question. What exactly is driving the recent surge in unrest and violence across the nation? Well, to understand a country of this scale, you can't just look at one metric. It's like a giant puzzle. You have to look at the intersection of state authority, militant insurgency, and some deeply rooted social norms. Understanding how these crises overlap is absolutely crucial to grasping the future stability of the entire region.
But before we tackle all of that, let's do a super quick historical grounding. Since its independence back in 1947, when Liaquat Ali Khan became the first and longest-serving prime minister, Pakistan has faced an incredibly complex political landscape. The framework established back then really set the stage for this continuous balancing act between civilian governance, military influence, and regional friction that we still see unfolding today.
All right, here's our agenda for today's explainer. 1. Political and human rights. 2. The polio vaccination crisis. 3. Arranged and forced marriage. 4. Extremism and Islamic norms. And finally, 5. Rising security threats.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Political and Human Rights, Government Crackdowns and Protests.
Over the past year or so, the tension between state authorities and political activists has really hit a boiling point in several provinces. Recent political actions have been severe. This is starkly detailed by Amnesty International's reporting on the government's harsh response to protests in Pakistan-administered Kashmir this past June. Right after the Joint Awami Action Committee was designated as a prescribed organization, authorities reportedly used internet shutdowns, mass arrests, and physical force to curb the flow of information and basically quell the demonstrations.
On top of that, we're seeing anti-terrorism laws increasingly being used against political activists. Take Dr. Maharang Baloch, for example. She's the leader of the Baloch Yakjadi Committee, and she was sentenced to life imprisonment in June 2026. This actually drew grave concern from UN experts, who explicitly pointed out that counter-terrorism legislation is being misused to restrict peaceful fundamental rights. And it's not an isolated incident. We're seeing similar anti-terrorism charges levied against dozens of workers from the banned TLP party down in Sindh.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, the polio vaccination crisis, disinformation and danger.
This is where a severe public health issue literally morphs into a deadly security challenge. Militant groups, particularly the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, fuel this fierce opposition to public health campaigns through incredibly dangerous disinformation. They're spreading narratives claiming that the vaccines are a Western plot to sterilize Muslim children, or that they contain forbidden pig-derived ingredients, or even that the health workers are actually foreign intelligence operatives. And this severely endangers workers in Pakistan, which, remember, remains one of only 2 countries on Earth where polio is still endemic.
The crucial point here is the human cost. This isn't just online rhetoric. It translates to lethal violence on the ground. We saw this tragically in the May 2026 attack, where 2 police officers were gunned down while defending polio workers in the Bajour district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Just think about that for a second. Simply trying to eradicate a disease requires armed escorts, and those escorts are frequently targeted.
Which brings us to Section 3, Arranged and Forced Marriage, Cultural Norms and Individual Rights.
Let's step away from state politics for a moment and look at localized cultural norms, specifically how they affect women and girls. A 2024 Gallup survey reveals a pretty stark reality about the social fabric of the country. A massive 81% of married Pakistanis reported having an arranged marriage managed by their parents. In contrast, only 18% reported marrying by their own choice, though that number does tick up slightly among adults under 30.
Now, it gets alarming when we look at forced conversions through marriage. Data from 2025 highlights a very targeted demographic. The report notes that 75% of the women and girls subjected to forced conversion of marriage were Hindu, while the remaining 25% were Christian. And almost 80% of these specific incidents happened in Sindh province, primarily targeting girls between the ages of 14 and 18. So the data reveals a highly targeted vulnerability for minority religious groups in specific areas.
So what's driving this? Well, several socioeconomic factors heavily drive child and forced marriage. According to the data, pervasive poverty and dowry-related financial pressures are massive catalysts. But it's equally driven by cultural beliefs.
particularly this concept that early marriage protects a girl's isn't or honor in communities where female chastity is deemed paramount. To really understand these dynamics, we need to define a couple of specific cultural practices outlined in the EUAA report. Two prominent ones are wada sada, which is the direct exchange of female family members through marriage between two families, and then there's swada, a practice where young girls are married off essentially as currency to resolve disputes, blood feuds, or debts between men.
And look, refusing an arranged marriage carries severe, often fatal consequences, which the report documents extensively as honor killings. In one devastating case from March 2025 in Punjab, an 18-year-old bride was stabbed to death by her own father right on our wedding day, simply because she chose to marry a neighbor against his explicit wishes. It's absolutely tragic. Let's move to Section 4, Extremism and Islamic Norms, Ideologies of Non-State Actors.
These rigid cultural norms we just discussed, they often intersect with the violent ideologies of extremist groups enforcing their strict interpretations of Islamic norms. Take the TTP's own 2026 internal publication, for example. They openly justify extreme violence, stating that anyone who changes their religion must be killed. They reject democracy and secularism as apostasy, and explicitly state that they legitimize suicide attacks as a, quote, potent weapon against anyone they deem a non-believer or an opponent of their ideology.
The group's rigid codes even extend to highly specific internal regulations. Their 2026 Code of Conduct explicitly prohibits fighters from keeping berish, which refers to young, beardless boys, in their military centers or residential villages. This really indicates a strict internal policing of their ranks to enforce their specific moral and operational codes.
And in a really striking collision of modern technology and strict religious norms, the report highlights a July 2026 fatwa issued by a prominent mufti. He declared that cryptocurrency, including USDT and other tokens, is not recognized as wealth under Sharia law, making the purchase of goods or services with crypto completely impermissible. It's a fascinating example of how traditional jurisprudence interacts with 21st century digital economies.
All right, final section. Section 5, Rising Security Threats, the Human Toll of Militancy.
Zooming back out to the macro level, we have to examine the sheer physical toll this militancy and unrest takes on the nation as a whole. And the statistics here are staggering. According to ACLED data tracked in the report, between November 2024 and July 2026, over 9,000 fatalities were recorded across Pakistan as a direct result of violence, terrorist attacks, and counterterrorism operations. Over 9,000.
And the geographical concentration of this conflict is stark. Out of those 9,000 fatalities, a massive majority occurred in just two provinces. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa saw over 4,500 deaths, and Balochistan saw over 4,000. The rest of the country accounts for a tiny fraction in comparison. This shows you exactly where the fault lines of this insurgency actually lie.
State security forces remain prime targets for these militant factions. We saw evidence of this in a devastating series of coordinated attacks just this past July in Balochistan, where insurgents abducted and executed 18 police officers, alongside killing 11 soldiers in separate strikes. The push and pull between the state and these non-state actors is relentless, and it's incredibly bloody.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're looking at a nation caught in multiple overlapping struggles, from intense government crackdowns to ruthless militant insurgencies to deeply rooted social practices like forced marriages. As these localized conflicts threaten to spill over, the real question we have to ask is, can a state fighting on so many internal fronts maintain stability in such a volatile region? That's the big question we're left with. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.